Hello, welcome. I know that some of you are curious because you see the title, so I'm just going to say it right up front, the thesis statement for the video, which is that I've been running Pathfinder 2nd Edition for a year, and I've been having a lot of fun with it. Definitely enjoying it more than when we first started playing it. So, kind of the background to the story. I wanted to take a break from 5th edition. I had been running it for several years and kind of wanted to try a different system. I was originally leaning towards running a more rules light game. However, my players were not as interested in one of those systems because they were like, we want powers and abilities and rules for how those powers interact with each other. So that ended up kind of ruling out Fate or Dungeon World or any of the other light systems out there and really kind of narrowed it down the pool of potential games that we could jump into. A week later, out of the blue, I had contacted them again and said, hey, how would you guys feel about playing Pathfinder 1st edition, which was a weird choice. But before they could finish roasting me over the pit fire, I was able to explain, look, I haven't played it in forever, and I actually want to try it to again, and I remember it being like really complicated and difficult, and but we are better gamers than we were, plus one of the players is interested in trying it again because he had played it a while ago, and another player had played it in high school, so yeah, let's do it. So we got into Pathfinder 1st edition, we did a session 0, and a session 1, and that was it. We stopped after that point. It was really rough. So, the first problem we have going into it is that most of my players nowadays kind of need an online character builder or some kind of assistant tool, and that a lot of the ones that are out there for 3.5 in Pathfinder are kind of old or buggy or out of date, and sometimes when they're building their characters, I'd be like, why do you have this 20th level world-ending sword? And they'd be like, well, the system let me add it to my character sheet. And I'd be like, but it's a 20th level sword. And they'd be like, but then why didn't it give me an error when I added it to my sheet? And I'd have to go no and remove it. And the compounding issue is that I don't know enough about the system to actually fix any of their problems. We had originally gotten into it like, well, it's our first time playing the system. We'll just keep it simple. Try not to do anything majorly complicated, and then we cut to 3 hours into character creation, and I'm like looking up stat blocks for monsters because someone decided to go the custom race builder option, and now I gotta find a balanced way to homebrew this ability that they want. It also kind of makes me appreciate that normally when we're playing, each individual player knows part of the rules and they're able to correct each other, but here when we're going into it blind, it's very difficult. But, I do have a funny story from it. So, in the session, the players are fighting some snakes. And I know how snakes are run in 5th edition, where they just kind of have a poison tag to their damage. They hit someone, they roll, maybe they get poisoned, blah, blah, blah. Here, when a snake bites you, they took 1 piercing damage and then rolled Constitution, and then they took, Constitution damage. And all of a sudden, one of the players almost dies from snake bites, and he's having to rest and recover while he's getting his constitution back, and the cleric's healing magic does nothing because it's poison. It's not like a wound that you can just patch up. So on the one hand, while the fight was longer and more complicated, it was kind of cool. Like, that was a story, you know? That was a snake. That felt like a snake. But after that, my group, which normally wasn't interested in 2nd edition, after playing 1st edition, was totally on board. Imagine that. So I ended up being kind of in this weird position while being someone that prefers a lighter system, kind of running Pathfinder 2nd edition, even though it wasn't something I was kind of interested in. And then after running it and playing it for several months again, I did kind of come around to see how the system works. I think that sort of the big takeaway for me, large part of that, is that there are certain encounters that you can run in Pathfinder that just don't work in 5th edition. While I don't know if I would say that Pathfinder is a more balanced system, it's just that what it values is very different than in 5e. Because in that system, it kind of wants you to have a wider boards with lots of enemies, and spreading out damage is very important. Whereas I think that in Pathfinder, it sort of wants you to have like one very tall effect or enemy. In Pathfinder, I was originally overwhelmed with a lot of different persistent effects that were happening. I found that the more and more I GM it, the more I kind of scale it down to be like maybe 1 or 2 sort of active effects at a time, because I know that it's going to be harder to maintain the board state round after round if these are just being persistent. I do think I would describe it as kind of more of a lower power fantasy. It's been interesting that the players haven't been really overly excited about their characters or the abilities. Like, there's nothing that they've gotten that they've been overjoyed about. But there is an upside to this, that I, as a GM, almost never encounter one specific power that I need to work around. A lot of times in 5e, the magic is tremendously powerful, but it's balanced around concentration checks. So they kind of have to give you all that power up front, and it makes for very punchy fights. While you could run kind of a shorter, faster, punchier Pathfinder 2nd Edition battle, I think that where the system really shines is these kind of less frequent, longer, grindier games. Since the magic system sort of assumes that the fights are going to be these long slogfests, which is why each fight kind of assumes that the players are entering into it with full hit points, and the magic often involves these very minor but persistent effects. I think that I would describe that Pathfinder does kind of hold the players down. It does prevent them from using abilities in certain ways, but that's a trade-off. Because on the other hand, what you get is I, as a GM, rarely have an ability that I need to work around. Otherwise, they're just going to completely wreck everything. In my group, we've got an interesting spread of players. We have one player who loves it, has always loved it, super fan. We've got two players who are kind of on the fence, who've kind of come around to it, and one player who loves us and will play the game even though it's not his favorite, just because of how much he loves us. And I have a tremendous respect for that player. Also, Path Builder. That app is doing a lot of heavy lifting. Like, I actually don't think we would be playing this game now if we had to do everything by hand like when we first started. There's a lot of stuff that I like the second time around now. I like the fact that it doesn't have magic weapons being the be-all to end-all. I like that it differentiates between different types of physical damage. There's still some stuff I just don't like in the system, like diagonal movement. I've played it, don't like it. I recently cut it out. I just said if you're going diagonal, if it's 5 squares, it's 5 squares. And everything is 1 for 1, and I'm so glad I did. I think overall, when I compare the two games, when I run Pathfinder 2nd Edition, I know that the fights are going to take twice as long as D&D, but that the crunchiness will make for more interesting encounters, and that the system wants to have every single attack feel unique. Like, if you're attacking with a forceful weapon versus an agile weapon, like, those tags matter, but that uniqueness comes with a downside, and that downside is time. But the decisions that they're making in combat will be more impactful. The more time you spend running it, it will get faster, but I'm just talking about like 20 to 30% faster. It's never going to be 0. There was one time where the players fought these alchemical golems, and they got positively wrecked by them. The party fled the fight and rested, recovered, and the next adventuring day just redid the fight. It was just a kind of a hard reset, everything exactly the same spell slots, same everything. Okay, let's just do the fight again. And the second time the players wrecked the golems. And it was just because they were better the second time around at kind of taking advantage of these little efficiencies and found ways to use their actions to kind of kite the golems and forcing them to waste their turns. So I guess now we're getting into the end of it, and you're probably wondering whether or not I'd be recommending it to people. And it's still a very hard question to answer, because I kind of feel like it's a strong, dark roast of coffee, which I developed a taste for it, but I don't know if I'd actually recommend it. Like, it's still pretty crunchy. And while it's easy to just roll a d20 and add the number, like, that's not the game. The game of Pathfinder is a tight resource management where you have this limited pool of actions for bonuses and penalties and trying to make decisions on what's the most efficient way to do the thing that you want to do. And if all the players are not on board with that, you're going to have a miserable time. And you could end up with a group like mine who enjoy spending X amount of time adding up all these little bonuses. Or like our friend who loves us and will put up with our nonsense.